morning, George. We heard late last night that the former Prince Andrew has officially moved out of Royal Lodge, the 30-room mansion on the Windsor estate, where he's lived for over 20 years.
After years of mounting scandal and relentless institutional pressure, a moment no one could have predicted storms into the headlines. Evicted in the dead of night from a 30-room mansion, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor arrived at his new home and was met with something that would have been utterly unthinkable just a few years ago. Whispers of humiliation, rejection, and long-buried consequences ignite fierce debate while sources and observers brace for impact. Palace insiders hint at a reality no public statement could have prepared for. Is this the final act of a royal disgrace? What exactly happened when he arrived? Who refused to serve him? And why does this moment feel like the most devastating blow yet?
Already they had to smuggle Prince Andrew out of his home under the cover of darkness because they're so embarrassed by him. I'm sure at some point they'll say they're going to ship him to a village.
This is the story of how the king's younger brother went from a 30-room mansion where he paid virtually nothing in rent to being evicted in the dead of night. And when he arrived at his new home, the staff refused to serve him. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, the man formerly known as Prince Andrew, Duke of York, has experienced what many are calling the most dramatic fall from grace in modern royal history. On a quiet Monday night, he slipped out of Royal Lodge, the sprawling Windsor Great Park estate that had been his home for over 2 decades. No ceremony, no farewell, just darkness.
But yeah, I have had it confirmed that his move from Royal Lodge has taken place and that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor is now a resident.
Sources revealed he chose to leave under cover of darkness because facing the humiliation in daylight was simply too much. One source put it bluntly, leaving was so humiliating for him that he chose to do it under the cover of darkness. He had planned to cling on a little longer, but with the latest Epstein files, it was made clear to him that it was time to go. Those words tell you everything. This was not a dignified transition, it was a removal. One that even Andrew himself knew he could not face in the light of day.
Also had decided, look, enough was enough, and the optics of him living on the Windsor estate had just become too much, and it was time for him to move out of that large property.
His destination was Wood Farm Cottage on the Sandringham estate, the same quiet property where his late father, Prince Philip, spent much of his retirement. But here is the thing. When Andrew arrived, he discovered something that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. Staff had been told they do not have to serve him if they feel uncomfortable. And according to sources, there is already quite a list of people saying no thanks. Because he is now, in their words, a total pariah. Picture that for a moment. A man once second in line to the throne, rejected by household staff who simply walked away. Not forced out, not reassigned. They chose to leave rather than serve him.
The cameras to defend his friendship with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
He knows exactly what he's done, and I hope he comes clean about it.
I have no recollection of ever meeting him.
The path to this humiliation stretches back years. Andrew flew helicopters in the Falklands War, married Sarah Ferguson, and fathered 2 daughters. For a long time, he was the Queen's favorite son, untouchable, protected, certain of his place within the institution. Then Jeffrey Epstein entered his life, and nothing was ever the same again. That shadow turned into a full eclipse when Andrew gave what many consider the most disastrous interview in British royal history to the BBC. Sitting across from the interviewer, he failed to express a single word of empathy for Epstein's victims. The public reaction was immediate and fierce. He was forced to step back from royal duties almost overnight. The damage was irreversible.
Prince Andrew will no longer be a prince. The extraordinary announcement tonight from Buckingham Palace, pushed out of the royal family over his ties to the late convicted sex predator Jeffrey Epstein.
An out-of-court settlement with Virginia Giuffre followed. The figure was never officially confirmed, but estimates ran into the millions. Then came her posthumous memoir, arriving after her tragic death and tearing open wounds that had barely begun to close. Fresh scrutiny descended, and this time there was no interview to give, no statement to release, no way to manage the narrative. What followed was King Charles formally stripping his brother of every remaining title. No more prince, no more Duke of York, nothing. The last time a British prince lost his title was over a century ago. That single fact tells you everything about how extraordinary and how final this moment truly was.
Ovations. For the 22 years that he's had the lease on Royal Lodge, he's only paid what's called a peppercorn rent, which is a nominal amount, a very small amount that often isn't even.
His original departure from Royal Lodge had been set for much later, Instead, it was brought forward without warning, in the dead of night. The circumstances of that departure said everything about where he now stands. The house he left behind told its own story. 30 rooms across, nearly 100 acres, secured decades ago for virtually nothing in rent. A property worth tens of millions that Andrew had occupied while contributing almost nothing to its upkeep. When officials finally inspected it, they found it in a dilapidated state. The compensation he expected to receive for leaving early, wiped out entirely by the cost of repairs. Even in leaving, he left a mess behind.
It's a scandal the palace has not been able to shake.
How long have you known about Andrew and Epstein? Have you asked the police to cover up for Andrew?
And then the Epstein files landed. The U.S. Department of Justice released millions of pages of documents, thousands of images, and thousands of videos connected to Epstein's operations. Buried inside were photographs showing Andrew on all fours over an unidentified woman. Email exchanges also emerged, revealing Epstein describing women he wanted to, introduced to someone identified only as the Duke, written in a tone of casual familiarity that turned stomachs across the world. These exchanges directly contradicted Andrew's public claim that he had cut ties with Epstein years earlier. The gap between what he told the world and what the documents showed was impossible to ignore, and impossible to explain away.
All of this has been extremely damaging for the royal family. It's described Prince Andrew as a distraction, and it wants to really focus on the work of the royal family.
Then came something even more shocking. A lawyer told the BBC that his client had been sent to the UK by Epstein for a sexual encounter with Andrew at Royal Lodge itself, marking the first time an alleged survivor placed such an incident inside an actual royal residence. Police confirmed they are now assessing the information. Andrew continues to deny everything, but by this point, those denials carry a weight they can no longer bear. The institution had already made its decision. The titles were gone, the house was gone, and now the staff were gone too.
Britain's former Prince Andrew is facing growing pressure to appear before Congress and testify about his relationship with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. This comes after new images of the former royal were revealed in the latest release.
Make sure you hit that subscribe button because I've got a special video coming tomorrow that you absolutely won't want to miss. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss it. Pressure keeps building from across the Atlantic. The British Prime Minister has called on Andrew to testify before Congress. The U.S. Vice President has said he is open to Andrew appearing before American lawmakers. No legal mechanism exists to force him, but the calls keep growing louder. The walls keep closing in, and Andrew has nowhere left to hide. Wood Farm Cottage will remain his address until renovations at Marsh Farm are complete. Sarah Ferguson's future remains uncertain. Her spokesperson says only that she is assessing her options. Even his most loyal companion for decades appears to be stepping away.
Showing the former prince crouched over a young woman. House Democrats had asked the disgraced royal to appear for questioning in November as part of their ongoing probe of Epstein's alleged accomplices.
The behavior that led Andrew to this point fits into a larger pattern of scandal, denial, and institutional damage that has defined his reputation for years. As each new wave of Epstein material emerged, the pressure on the monarchy to contain the damage grew more intense. From the catastrophic BBC interview to the civil settlement, from the posthumous memoir to the latest document release, each revelation added another layer to a story that simply refused to go away. For many observers, the staff refusal at Wood Farm represents something even more devastating than the eviction itself. It signals that even those paid to serve him have drawn a line, that even within the walls of a royal estate, his name now carries consequences.
He's a bit interested in that, so they all came here to listen to about education solving the future. But no, I think it's all really important always to remember the victims and who are the victims in all this.
Prince Edward, when approached by a journalist hours after the latest files dropped, said simply that their thoughts were with the victims. Carefully chosen words, but the message was unmistakable. The working royal family had aligned itself with Epstein's victims rather than with Andrew. The contrast could not have been more pointed. While Andrew sat at Wood Farm rejected by staff and stripped of every title, his family was publicly putting distance between themselves and him. That line had shifted, irrevocably, and Andrew was standing alone on the wrong side of it, with no allies left and no institution willing to shield him any further.
An explosive new book hitting the shelves today is set to heap fresh scrutiny on convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and Britain's Prince Andrew. Nobody's Girl is a posthumous memoir from Virginia.
When Virginia Giuffre's memoir reached shelves, her brother offered a simple but cutting summary. He said today, an ordinary American girl from an ordinary American family brought down a British prince. Those words capture something important about where this story has arrived. They capture the scale of what has happened. A man born into extraordinary privilege, raised inside one of the most protected institutions in the world, undone by choices he made and consequences he spent years refusing to face. Years of entitlement, denial, and institutional protection could not ultimately prevent the reckoning from arriving. The warnings were there long before this midnight eviction. The growing gap between Andrew's public statements and the mounting documentary evidence had been visible for years to anyone paying close enough attention.
Well, you know what? Good riddance, Tanya. I mean, there's been scandal after scandal with this bloke. This was bound to happen.
Yeah.
Now he sits at a cottage on a remote Norfolk estate, rejected by the very people who would once have considered it an honor to serve him. The humiliation, as one source noted, is far from finished. More Epstein documents continue to be released. Police are assessing fresh allegations. Congressional interest in his testimony remains active, and the posthumous memoir of Virginia Giuffre ensures that the human cost of this scandal will not be quietly forgotten. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor maintains his denials of all allegations, but one source captured his current reality in a single word: pariah.
No more titles, no more Royal Lodge, a 30-bedroom mansion that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor's had the pleasure of enjoying for 30 years.
The Royal Lodge he left behind tells its own story. Decades of privilege, a rent arrangement that bordered on absurdity, a vast property left in disrepair while he lived inside it undisturbed, and a departure timed not around his own dignity, but around the latest wave of documents that made his continued presence simply untenable. The direction of travel is unmistakable. From Royal Lodge to Wood Farm to, eventually, Marsh Farm. Each step removes him further from the center of the institution he was born into. Each step places him deeper into a margins where influence fades, visibility disappears, and the world slowly stops paying attention.
I completely agree. But overall, David, I think it's really embarrassing for the royal family to have to do this. And I think that it was probably Prince William who said, all right, come on, we got to move Andrew on.
So when you look at the midnight eviction, the staff who refused to serve him, the growing calls for him to testify before Congress, and the fresh allegations now being assessed by police, do you see a man finally facing the consequences of his own choices? Or do you see an institution protecting itself while the full truth remains buried? The eviction has happened, the staff have refused, the titles are gone, and the humiliation, as sources close to the situation confirm, is far from finished.